This letter should serve as a proof of Florio's involvement in the editorship of Shakespeare'S Folio. Hi everyone, welcome back to John Florio channel. I am Mary and I'm here to talk about John Florio. This year marks the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare'S Folio. And so many mysteries still haven't been discovered about this project, which was published 7 years after Shakespeare's death. Today I will show you for the first time a secret letter that might change the history of the most important book ever published in English literature. But before we start, if you are new here, please don't forget to subscribe to help me grow this channel. Leave a comment because I love to read your opinions, and if you want to like the video. But now let's start. Who was Ben Jonson? Ben Jonson was an English playwright and poet. Jonson's artistry exerted a lasting influence upon English poetry and stage comedy. Jonson is also famous for some gossips around Shakespeare. For example, when he describes him as little Latin and less Greek, and as someone who never blotted out line, and of course that he was not for an age, but for all time. Apart from these mentions, we actually know nothing about the relationship between Ben Jonson and Shakespeare. But we know a lot about Ben Jonson's friendship with John Florio. When Jonson began his career in theatre, John Florio, 20 years older than him, was already a successful writer, and they certainly began collaborating when both joined the court of Queen Anne of Denmark. Florio was always very keen on collaborating with young writers. It is also attested that during those years when he worked as groom of the Privy Chamber, a personal secretary to Queen Anne of Denmark, Florio collaborated in court entertainments, the masked courts that Ben Jonson arranged with Inigo Jones. Florio, for example, had the role of choosing musicians who performed during the masks. But there is more, because Florio also collaborated in plays. Florio's involvement in theatre has been widely discussed. Since his first work, published when he was 25 years old, First Fruits, there are attestations written by the Leicester Company. Richard Tarleton, John Bentley, they all thank Florio because he collaborated with them. Florio kept working in theatre his whole life, and when he met Ben Jonson, they collaborated for Volpone. Volpone is probably considered Jonson's greatest and most successful play, imprinted with Italianate atmosphere. There is a copy of Volpone which was owned by Florio, which contains an inscription written by Jonson: "To my loving father and worthy friend, Master John Florio, the aid of his muses." Ben Jonson seals this testimony of friendship and love. Now, what can we deduce from this dedication? The word father doesn't just mean that Florio was much older than Jonson, but that he was actually a father figure to him, helping Jonson, educating him and collaborating with him. Florio was very open-minded, he was very generous, and he loved to collaborate with young writers at the early stage of their career. I think Ben Jonson was very grateful to have Florio by his side in a working environment in which there was a lot of envy and jealousy between writers. Now, we know that when the first folio was published, Shakespeare was already dead. Shakespeare died in 1616, 7 years before the first folio was published. The book contained 36 Shakespeare plays, 20 of which had never been printed. We also know that the story of the two actors, John Hemming and Henry Condell, writing and finishing the work is scarcely credible. Why? Well, many Shakespeare plays existed in a number of versions. All needed to be edited and prepared for the press. Neither Hemmings nor Condell had produced a book before, nor would they afterwards. And it is unlikely that the backers of the Folio, the printers Isaac Jagger and Edward Blount, would have risked putting such an expensive project in their hands. Would they have been entrusted with such a long and complex undertaking? I doubt that. The cost of the project suggests that it was written by a more experienced hand. Now, it has been suggested that since we find a dedication written by Ben Jonson in the first folio and that he published his own collection of plays in 1616, that he certainly had a hand in Shakespeare's first folio. But some Shakespeare scholars also suggest that Ben Jonson was helped by another ghostwriter, John Florio. In a groundbreaking article published on The Guardian, Southampton discovered many similarities between Florio's writing style and the anonymous author behind the first folio. He demonstrated that the words, the spellings, and the grammar were familiar to Florio. That Jonson and Florio collaborated for Shakespeare's first folio was also suggested later by Stuart Kelt in his book Shakespeare's Library, Unlocking the Greatest Mystery in Literature. Stuart Kelt suggests that the first folio was edited by both Florio and Ben Jonson, described them as Shakespeare editors, master polishers and serial neologists. The famous Shakespearean scholar Erik Rasmussen from the University of Nevada thinks the same. In his article Who Edited the Shakespeare First Folio, examined two possible candidates, Leonard Digges and John Florio. Rasmussen ended his analysis by stating that he undertook this study because he wanted to prove that Leonard Digges was a more viable candidate than was John Florio. But the data does not support this conclusion. Indeed, this study in editorial attribution provides evidence that Florio's stylistic habit more closely resemble those of the editor of the first folio than do Digges. But today I want to show you for the first time a secret letter that might change the history of Shakespeare's first folio. In 1623, the year the first folio was published, John Florio wrote a letter to Lord Cranfield, Lord Treasurer. In this letter, Florio writes that he needs money. Why? Because he's writing an expensive, important work. These are the exact words that Florio writes in the letter. He asks to have some money to finish and publish my great and laborious work, for which my country and posterity, yea, happily your children, so long as English is spoken, shall have cause to thank and remember your lordship's honourable name, that fostered the muse of your most humble poor servant, John Florio. This letter was written in 1623. And you know what? John Florio didn't publish a single work in that year or later with his name. So which was the work he was talking about? What could have been that extraordinary work? Some Florio scholars, like Mrs. Frances Yates, have erroneously tried to suggest that in the letter Florio was referring to his third dictionary. Well, this is not correct, and for a great number of reasons. First, John Florio had already prepared his third dictionary, which was a mere update to his two previous dictionaries. Also, Florio didn't publish a dictionary between 1623 and 1626, the year of his death. A third dictionary was published by Giovanni Torriano in 1659. In the preface, Torriano wrote that he had taken some of the pages published from Florio's old draft. Old draft. He simply received some manuscripts that Florio had. This does not correspond with what Florio was writing in that letter, in which he underlines that he needs money for a great and expensive work, not a mere update like the dictionary was. But the final proof that he was not talking about the dictionary is given in the letter. In a note attached in the 1623 letter that Florio wrote, confirms that he received the money in the same year. We see by this record petition that the request had been productive of effect and procured him some relief from the Lord Treasurer. He was paid in that year. It is irrational to believe that Florio was paid in 1623 for an expensive and laborious work, received them, and waited more than 30 years to publish a dictionary that wasn't even published under his own name, but by Toriano, that Florio in 1623 didn't even know they existed. Furthermore, in the letter, Florio doesn't cite the work as dictionary. He doesn't write, I have to publish my dictionary. He knew words quite well. Why he didn't write my dictionary? Because he wasn't working on his third dictionary. He cited as laborious work. He was implying that it was an important task he had undertaken anonymously and couldn't mention in a letter, perfectly knowing that he was working as ghostwriter, as he already did in 1620 with Boccaccio's Decameron. Yes, because in 1620, 3 years before Shakespeare'S Folio, John Florio published anonymously Boccaccio's Decameron. The printer is Isaac Jaga, Edward Blount, and the dedicatee, Sir Herbert, will be the same protagonist of the publication in 3 years' time of Shakespeare's celebrated Folio. This letter should serve as a proof of Florio's involvement in the editorship of Shakespeare'S Folio. Frampton, who also published a work on Shakespeare and Montaigne, whose essays Florio translated into English, ended his article by asserting, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Florio's possible involvement with the Folio is that we may never know its true extent. We cannot tell for certain whether the words were written by John Florio or William Shakespeare. Stay resolute. Bye!